Ferguson now, do you know? Because I've read reports that she's in the United Arab Emirates and broke. I've also read reports that she spent a month at a luxury Swiss resort that cost $25,000 a day. And it's a resort that she has promoted before. Here she is.
The fairy tale is officially over, and this time there is no palace balcony, no polite wave, no carefully staged smile to soften the fall. This is about collapse. This is about exposure. This is about how Sarah Ferguson, once wrapped in royal privilege and relentless reinvention, was allegedly caught slipping into obscurity while the world was distracted, and the silence around her grew louder than any scandal before it. Here she is. The $16,000 per day Swiss sanctuary has vanished, replaced by a modest 100-lawn-night retreat on Ireland's windswept shores. While global attention focused on her former husband's February detention, Sarah Ferguson orchestrated a quiet disappearance, frozen assets, a severed royal safety net, and a devastating cache of exposed correspondence have rendered her brand toxic. She once defended a predator as heroic to preserve her reputation. But by 2026, no reputation remains worth salvaging. Now hiding in plain sight at an affordable coastal wellness center, the pressing question emerges. Is this merely a strategic pause or the concluding act of an extraordinary downfall? And just like that, the transformation begins. Not with a bang, but with a downgrade so staggering it feels almost symbolic. A woman who once moved through Buckingham Palace corridors as if history itself bowed to her presence is now reportedly trading Swiss luxury for Irish anonymity. Why? Why abandon a $16,000 per day fortress of gold-infused treatments and silent indulgence for a budget coastal lodge battered by Atlantic winds? That isn't a vacation. That's retreat. That's recalibration. Or maybe escape. Because while cameras chased headlines about her former husband's February detention, something quieter was happening. Something strategic. A disappearance so subtle it almost felt intentional. Assets frozen. The royal safety net reportedly severed. Business links evaporating. And then the emails. Always the emails. Words once whispered in confidence, suddenly echoing in courtrooms across the Atlantic. Words that, if true, slice through decades of carefully curated outrage and carefully televised indignation. Swiss mountains excel at concealing the planet's most costly mysteries. Yet in 2026, even a 16,000-trod LB daily wellness fortress couldn't stem the hemorrhaging. For months, investigators traced leads to Paracel's recovery in Zurich, where the ultra-wealthy vanished from public view. However, as media hunted for Sarah Ferguson amid opulent luxury, her circumstances were rapidly deteriorating. The gold-infused atmosphere and transformative treatments of the elite had become financially impossible. Revenue hadn't merely decreased. It had completely ceased. Abruptly, the Duchess narrative veered toward County Donegal's rugged Atlantic coastline. Local residents were stunned to witness a former palace inhabitant registering at Valley Life and Lodge. Gone were private wings and regal accommodations replaced by standard quarters at 13 nightly. A staggering 99% status plummet. This represented survival strategy, not leisure travel. In Mayfair, 113 barely purchases quality wine. But in Donegal, it secured anonymity while the York reputation sustained catastrophic damage. Sarah allegedly exchanged high society visibility for seaside strolls and secluded corners, desperately avoiding detection as fresh digital evidence emerged in American courts. Her retreat wasn't solely financial. It was about escaping her own documented words. When those confidential messages reached public consumption, the legendary image she'd fought to maintain would transform into her ultimate destruction. A 99% status plummet. That number doesn't just measure money. It measures narrative collapse. From elite recovery clinics in Zurich to 13 nightly quarters in Donegal, from curated exclusivity to coastal obscurity. And what's more unsettling than the downgrade itself is the timing. The retreat coincided not with gentle retirement, but with digital evidence surfacing in American courts. That's not coincidence, that's pattern. Because buried in 2026 disclosures was something far more damaging than financial distress. It wasn't just that income streams dried up, it was why. Allegations that private assurances contradicted public outrage. Allegations that the brand, the carefully defended Sarah Ferguson identity, may have been prioritized over something far more important: truth. Newly revealed correspondence from April 2011 shows Sarah desperately requesting employment as domestic staff, highlighting the razor-thin boundary between aristocratic position and complete financial dependency. She transcended friendship, becoming a supplicant seeking wages from someone society had rightfully ostracized. The most damaging revelation involved her alleged private assurance to the financier that she wouldn't label him a predator personally, claiming her public distancing served only to protect her marketability. This shocking 2026 disclosure suggests her televised outrage was performative theater while her private allegiance remained steadfast. However, reputations built on deception inevitably collapsed under scrutiny. As public recognition dawned that she prioritized personal branding over victim welfare, financial consequences swiftly followed. The Sarah Ferguson brand she desperately protected didn't merely suffer. It completely evaporated from commercial relevance. With income sources rapidly disappearing, her loyalty's true price would soon face courtroom accounting. Courtroom accounting. That phrase lingers. Because once loyalty is monetized, once branding eclipses morality, the bill eventually arrives. And when it does, it isn't paid in installments, it's paid in reputation. The revelation that she allegedly sought employment from someone society had ostracized blurs the line between aristocracy and dependency, between duchess and applicant, between indignation and desperation. If public distancing was strategy and private reassurance was reality, then which version was authentic? The televised outrage or the quiet promise that certain words would never be spoken? And the fallout didn't trickle in slowly, it detonated. Within one February week, 6 Sarah Ferguson-linked enterprises were reportedly dissolved or marked for registry elimination. 6. Sea Phoenix Events, Fergie's Farm, Luna Investments, Solomon Ltd, Philanthre Ltdd, Planet Partners Productions, one by one, extinguished, not paused, not restructured, dissolved. The inventory reads less like business restructuring and more like brand liquidation. Her charity, Sarah's Trust, launched with visibility and purpose, announced indefinite closure. Sponsors who once tolerated controversy reached their limit. Not quiet distancing, not polite hesitation, departure. When sponsors flee, it isn't because of rumor, it's because of risk. And then came the voices calling for more than reputational consequences. Sarah Ferguson is a material witness to the sex trafficking. She should certainly be testifying to the Senate. Herc should be looking at her. The Companies Act, charitable laws, material witness, Senate, Herc, charitable breaches. Words that shift the narrative from scandal to scrutiny, from gossip to investigation. The 2026 Justice Department revelations didn't just chip away at her standing. They allegedly obliterated the economic scaffolding that held her lifestyle upright. Zurich luxury replaced by Irish modesty. Corporate ventures erased. Global charity shuttered. Income streams vanished. And then there's the irony no one can ignore. While her empire crumbled, her former husband faced his own reckoning, culminating in a police cell on his 66th birthday. A family once synonymous with access and immunity now confronting accountability, or at least the optics of it. So what remains? A 4-star Irish spa, seaside strolls, silence. Silence can be strategic. Silence can be protective. But silence can also be deafening. Because when public sympathy evaporates and institutional protection recedes, what fills the vacuum? Questions. Did she miscalculate the durability of her brand? Did she believe loyalty, even controversial loyalty, would be quietly forgotten? Or did she think the royal title would cushion every impact? Now the world watching Donegal doesn't see a duchess navigating palace politics. It sees a woman navigating consequences. Titles mean less when bank accounts shrink. Connections matter less when companies dissolve. Prestige feels hollow when sponsors flee. And perhaps the most haunting element isn't the financial loss. It's trust. Public trust, once fractured, doesn't heal easily, especially when allegations suggest that outrage may have been performance and allegiance may have been private. The Atlantic winds in Donegal don't whisper apologies, they howl. They remind every traveler that once you're lost in the mist, the path back is cold and uncertain. The Irish coast offers anonymity, yes, but it also offers reflection. Was this retreat calculated damage control, a strategic pause before a comeback, or the final act of a decades-long balancing act between royal heritage and entrepreneurial ambition that finally collapsed under the weight of contradiction? The king is said to be prioritizing institutional survival over family loyalty. That's not just palace politics, that's preservation. When the crown distances itself, it does so for survival. So here she stands, not on a balcony, not in Zurich luxury, but in a modest coastal lodge where 113 buys anonymity instead of Mayfair indulgence, where she is simply another guest, another name on a registry, another visitor waiting to see what the next disclosure brings. Because 2026 may not be finished yet. Investigations intensify. Emails linger. Courtrooms echo. And while the spa offers temporary calm, the storm outside hasn't passed. And perhaps that is the most unsettling truth of all. This doesn't feel concluded. It feels suspended. Like a chapter paused mid-sentence. Like a legacy still unraveling. Was the Swiss sanctuary the illusion? Is the Irish lodge the reality? Or is this merely the quiet before something louder? The woman who once navigated Buckingham Palace corridors now navigates scrutiny. The brand that once monitored monetized connection now struggles under exposure. The loyalty that once seemed strategic now appears costly. And somewhere between Zurich's gold-infused privacy and Donegal's windswept austerity lies the question that refuses to disappear. Is this redemption delayed, or downfall confirmed? What makes this story even more unsettling is not just the fall itself, but the pattern that seems to stretch backward through time like a trail of quiet compromises that no one wanted to examine too closely until now. Because when 6 companies dissolve in a single week, when a flagship charity quietly shutters its doors indefinitely, when sponsors who once smiled beside you suddenly refuse to return calls, that is not random misfortune. That is coordinated retreat. And the question that lingers like fog over Donegal's coastline is simple but devastating. Who pulled away first? Was it the institutions, the investors, the palace? Or did Sarah Ferguson sense the incoming storm and step back before the lightning struck? The timing feels surgical. February erupts with detention headlines surrounding her former husband, attention locked firmly elsewhere, cameras chasing a different royal crisis. Meanwhile, corporate filings shift, registry statuses change, dissolution notices appear, not dramatic announcements, not press conferences, paperwork, quiet administrative erasure. That kind of dismantling doesn't happen overnight without preparation. It suggests anticipation. It suggests awareness. It suggests someone knew the next wave of disclosures would not be survivable under the old structure. Because once those alleged private assurances surfaced, once the narrative shifted from public condemnation to alleged private protection, the brand architecture didn't merely crack, it imploded. Public outrage is manageable when it is abstract. But when outrage becomes specific, time-stamped, documented, archived, replayed, that's when sponsors panic. That's when accountants whisper. That's when lawyers advise distance. And distance is exactly what appears to have followed. The York name, once leveraged for events, production ventures, lifestyle initiatives, philanthropic campaigns, suddenly became radioactive currency, toxic to attach to, risky to defend. And perhaps most telling of all is the alleged financial desperation revealed in those communications from 2011. Because desperation rewrites narratives. It reframes loyalty. It complicates morality. If someone positioned within aristocracy could allegedly request employment from a disgraced financier, what does that say about the illusion of stability behind palace walls? It suggests a razor-thin divide between privilege and precarity, between title and dependency. And if maintaining marketability required public distancing while private reassurances continued, then the performance itself becomes the scandal. Not the association alone, but the choreography. The contrast between televised indignation and alleged confidential loyalty is what ignited the 2026 reckoning. It transformed past controversies from embarrassing footnotes into active liabilities. And liabilities have costs. Legal costs, reputational costs, institutional costs. When calls begin for Senate testimony and Merck scrutiny, when commentators invoke charitable law breaches and corporate act violations, the conversation escalates from gossip to governance, from rumor to regulation. That shift changes everything. Because institutions tolerate scandal until it threatens structural credibility. Then they sever. And whispers suggest that royal protection, once quietly extended, has been recalibrated under a monarch focused on institutional survival above sentimental loyalty. That recalibration feels cold, but monarchy is not built on warmth, it is built on preservation. If distancing from one family member shields the crown from systemic damage, history shows the crown chooses survival every time. And so the Irish spa becomes more than a retreat. It becomes a symbol, not of relaxation, not of reinvention, but of containment, a controlled environment away from Mayfair optics, away from Swiss extravagance that would appear grotesque under investigation headlines. In Zurich, 16,000 per day might have signaled resilience. In 2026, it would have screamed denial. Donegal, by contrast, whispers humility. It signals contraction. It frames the narrative as necessity rather than indulgence. Yet, even humility, if strategic, is still branding. And the public is no longer easily persuaded, because trust, once fractured by allegations of duplicity, does not regenerate through scenic backdrops and coastal anonymity. It requires transparency. It requires accountability. It requires something that, so far, has remained conspicuously scarce: direct confrontation of the contradictions. Instead, there is silence. And silence, in moments like this, becomes its own language. Is it legal advice? Is it exhaustion? Is it calculation? Or is it acknowledgement that any statement risks deepening the hole? Meanwhile, the broader royal saga continues to unravel. Her former husband's detention reframed old associations in harsher light. Historical friendships once dismissed as awkward now feel ominous. Photographs once shrugged off as social artifacts now circulate as evidence exhibits. The public appetite for clarity has intensified, not softened. 2026 is not forgiving in the way earlier decades were. The digital archive remembers everything. Emails resurface. Statements are replayed. Inconsistencies are clipped, stitched, compared. There is no clean slate in the age of permanent receipts. And perhaps that is the true antagonist in this unfolding drama: memory. Institutional memory, digital memory, cultural memory. For decades, reinvention was Sarah Ferguson's greatest skill. Scandal would erupt, she would recalibrate, launch a new venture, reposition the narrative, charm the audience, and continue. But reinvention requires liquidity, financial and reputational. When both evaporate simultaneously, the maneuverability disappears. The Irish coast may offer physical refuge, but it does not erase archived correspondence. It does not dissolve corporate filings. It does not silence Senate discussions. It simply delays confrontation. And delay can feel like strategy until it becomes stagnation. The most haunting aspect of this saga is not the financial downgrade or even the alleged duplicity. It is the erosion of public sympathy. There was a time when she was viewed as the resilient outsider, the spirited duchess navigating exile with humor and hustle. That narrative protected her through previous controversies. But resilience narratives collapse when allegations suggest that survival came at the expense of principle. If branding eclipsed victim welfare, if loyalty was allegedly extended where condemnation was publicly declared, then the archetype shifts from survivor to strategist, and not in a flattering way. And yet, nothing is fully resolved. No final verdict has been delivered in the court of public opinion. Investigations intensify, but outcomes remain pending. Corporate closures signal collapse, but they could also signal restructuring. Silence may precede statement. Retreat may precede reinvention. Or retreat may simply be retreat. The ambiguity sustains the tension. Because this does not feel like a completed downfall with a neat epilogue. It feels like a mid-chapter pause where the protagonist has stepped off stage, but the spotlight has not turned off. The Atlantic winds continue to batter Donegal's shores, indifferent to titles and tabloid cycles. Inside a modest 4-star spa, a woman once synonymous with royal spectacle waits in relative obscurity, while lawyers, investigators, and commentators continue their work elsewhere. Is she calculating her next move? Is she bracing for subpoenas? Is she hoping the news cycle shifts again? Or has the gravity of 2026 finally anchored a narrative that can no longer float on charm alone? The tragedy, if there is one, is not merely material loss. It is the evaporation of credibility. And credibility, once dissolved, is almost impossible to reacquire at scale. The crown protects itself. Corporations protect their shareholders. Sponsors protect their brands. Courts protect due process. But who protects a legacy when it stands alone against archived contradiction? That is the question hovering over Donegal's gray horizon. And until it is answered clearly, directly, without choreography, the story remains unfinished. The spa doors may close quietly each evening. The guest registry may list her as simply another occupant. But outside, the narrative storm has not dissipated. It is circling, gathering, waiting. And whether this chapter ends in redemption, reckoning, or permanent obscurity is something even the Atlantic mist cannot yet conceal.